Welcome to Absolute Value Equations. In this podcast, we'll be defining absolute value and solving simple absolute value equations. First off, I want to look at the way people think of absolute value intuitively, so I have a couple of intuitive definitions at the top of the page. The first one says the absolute value of a number is the value of the number without its sign. So if I'm trying to take the absolute value, get my pen working here, if I'm trying to take the absolute value of negative 2, I want the value of negative 2 without its sign, which is 2. The second definition says the absolute value of a number is the positive value of a number. So if I'm taking the absolute value of negative 5, I want the positive value of that, which is 5. If it's positive 5, you generally don't write in the little plus for positive. Now those are easy to understand definitions, and that's the way most people think of absolute value. The problem is that they don't help us in problem solving. So what we're going to do next is come up with a working definition, and the problems that we're trying to solve are equations. So we're going to write the definition of absolute value in equation form. And we start off and we say the absolute value of x, written absolute value, two big bars, of x, is defined by the absolute value of x is x if x is greater than or equal to 0. So one conclusion you could immediately draw from that is that the absolute value of 0 will always be 0. And then the absolute value of x is negative x if x is less than 0. So what you can conclude from that is if x is less than 0, that means it's negative. So negative x would be positive. So in either case, the absolute value of a number is positive, and we can draw two key facts out of that definition. The first key fact, the absolute value of x is never negative. So if k is a negative number, and you have that the absolute value of x is equal to this negative number, and you're trying to solve that, you're not going to be able to solve that. An absolute value of x is never negative, so that will have no solution. And the second fact coming out of the definition is that the absolute value of x is always x or negative x. It can't be anything else. Okay, let's move on and do a first example here. Here we'll just find the absolute value of a couple of simple numbers. Since 2 is bigger than 0, the definition says if x is bigger than 0, the absolute value of x is x. So the absolute value of 2 is 2, and that's bigger than 0. Let's take a look at the second example here, or the second part of example 1, where we take the absolute value of negative 2. Since negative 2 is less than 0, our definition says up here, if x is less than 0, the absolute value of x is negative x. So the absolute value of negative 2 would be negative 2, which is 2, again, greater than 0. So absolute values can't be negative. Absolute values are either going to be 0 or they're going to be positive. Let's go on to an example 2. Here's the simplest type of equation we can solve. It says solve the absolute value of x is 5. Well, what numbers could solve that? We'll go by our definition since it's a working definition. It says if x is greater than 0, the absolute value of x is x. So I write that. The absolute value of x is x, and since the equation says the absolute value of x is 5, the absolute value of x is both x and 5, so that tells me that x is equal to 5. If x is less than 0, the absolute value of x is negative x. Now the absolute value of x is 5, so that tells me negative x is 5, so x is negative 5. So I got two solutions here, x is equal to 5 or x is equal to negative 5. Now I can make sure they're right by checking them into the original equation. If I check 5 in, I get the absolute value of 5 is 5. That certainly checks out. That's true. If I plug negative 5 in, I get the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. So again, I've solved the original equation. Both of those answers are good answers. And we can draw a lesson from example 2. We can say that in general, if m is any expression containing x, I used m for mess. That's what I always use because sometimes they're kind of big things, that could be very complicated x expressions. But if m is an expression containing x and k is greater than or equal to 0, then if the absolute value of m is equal to k, then m is equal to k, or m is equal to negative k, just as in the problem above with x. X was equal to 5, or x was equal to negative 5. And you can use that. If absolute value of m is k, then m is k or m is negative k. You can use that as the first step when you're solving an absolute value equation. So let's actually solve now a more complicated absolute value equation. Here we start off, example 3 says solve the absolute value of 2x minus 5 is equal to 11. And we want to use that line right above it, right here, as our first step. So I'm going to say the mess 2x minus 5 is 11 is k, or, and it's very important that you say or, the mess 2x minus 5 is equal to negative k. And that's the statement right above, m is equal to k or m is equal to negative k. And so now we're just solving this for x. So I move the 5 over to the other side, 2x equals 16. X is equal to 8. I could check that very easily by plugging x in the original equation. The absolute value of 2 times 8 minus 5 is the absolute value of 11, which is 11, so that answer checks out. Let's go to the other one. If 2x minus 5 is equal to negative 11, I move the negative 5 to the other side by adding 5 to both sides. And I get 2x is equal to negative 6, x is equal to negative 3. And that's going to be a good solution too, but we'll check it just to be sure. 2 times negative 3 minus 5 in absolute value is absolute value of negative 11, and that's 11, so that also solves the original equation, so those are good solutions. Now, in example 4, we're going to get a break. Example 4 says solve the absolute value of 4x is equal to negative 6. One of our key facts, way up here at the top when we did our key facts, one of our key facts was that an absolute value can't be negative. So since this is trying to say an absolute value is negative, we just don't even start. We just say no solution, and that's the end of it. And there you have the definition of absolute value and how to solve absolute value equations.